guys in suits. Gary Kelly. And now for the Boston Globe Hornbook Award for Picture Book. Barnett's story about a little girl with a magical box containing a never-ending supply of colorful yarn reads like one that has been around for years and yet feels anything but derivative or stale. Annabelle's knitting exploits benefit her whole village, with people, animals, buildings, and even trees donning the sweaters she creates to lend warmth of physical and emotional states to her community. Alas, an evil archduke, who is something of a clothes horse, plots to wrest the magic box of yarn away from Annabelle, but because his intentions are anything but selfless, the box loses its magic in his hands. All's well that ends well, with a box restored to Annabelle's kind and nimble hands. Klassen's delightful ink and digitally rendered artwork lends a timeless quality to the story, apropos its folkloric sensibility. I am delighted to present a 2012 Boston Globe Hornbook Award for Picture Book to Extra Yarn, published by Balzer and Bray, a HarperCollins imprint, edited by Alessandra Balzer, illustrated by Jon Klassen, and written by Mac Barnett. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Yeah, hold my bowl. Hi. I don't know if you guys know, but illustrators are notoriously good at giving speeches. When they decide to get into illustration, it is secretly because they know how good they are at public speaking. And they can't wait until the day when they get to win an award and they can finally show a room full of literary people how good they are at it. So thank you very, very much. I finally get to show how talented I am at giving speeches. I'd like to start by thanking the judges for the award and for picking us out of all the great books that came out this year, and for including us with the other authors and illustrators. It's very, very flattering company to be in. I'd also like to thank our publisher, Balzer and Bray at HarperCollins, and our agent, Sir Steve Malk, who is no small part of why this book got put together. I'd like to thank Mac for writing the book for me to illustrate. I'm not sure you can pay an illustrator a higher compliment than writing a book with them in mind, and it's truly a lucky thing from a good author who understands how to give the illustrator a lot of favors and make him look very good. Before I was lucky enough to get into picture books full-time, I worked at an animation studio, which is another lucky job to have. My job there was mostly to help design the sets and props, and they would build 3D models of them for the movie to happen in. And we would go to these meetings and talk about them all the time. And one time we were having a meeting about a bar we were supposed to design, a very old, dusty bar. And our boss was like, you know what was a really good bar? It was this one in There Will Be Blood. They had this guy took his brother to a brothel, and it was this old, dusty place full of old wood, and it was all dimly lit. It was great. And we all said, yeah, that was a good bar. It was full of like mason jars and like just the right, it wasn't ornate, it was just perfect, it was great. And we all were making lists of the things we remember from the bar, and we're like, we should take a look at that movie again. And so we all filed into the screening room with notepads, getting ready to watch this scene, and we put it on, and the scene is like 20 seconds long, and it's a close-up shot of the main character and nothing else. It's just sounds, of bars, tinkling glasses, and people laughing horribly, and that was the whole shot. And we finished it, and we felt so stupid. We hadn't written a thing down, but we all had remembered this thing we'd all remembered this beautiful bar that we just wanted to copy down. And it was so crazy because I bet that if you'd asked us to draw it before we saw that scene again, we all would have drawn pretty much the same bar, even though there was no bar at all. Later that same year, I got offered my very first picture book illustration job, and I was really excited, and I was going to go back and look at all the books I really liked, not just for research, but just to kind of celebrate the fact that I was going to get to do one of these things. And the same thing happened where I hadn't looked at these books for a long time, and they were so simple. Sometimes there was nothing to what I had remembered. I'd painted these huge scenes around these books. I was looking at Sam and the Firefly, and I'd pictured these huge nighttime scenes, and there's just like pencil shadings over teal. That's the whole book. It's crazy. And I went and looked at Frog and Toad, and I had these huge forests in mind, and like the vignettes are like this, and the plants don't even finish. It's not that they aren't very good. They're very, very good, but you build these whole worlds around these books you remember. I think in the stories we remember the most are the ones that give us just a certain set of ingredients to start us off, and then they let us loose, and we can build things on them, and they affect, and we just use what we know and what we've learned and the experiences we've had. And the separation between the story and where we meet it ends up blurring to the point where it's not there anymore, and we've just made this thing that just exists on its own. And when this gets interesting isn't when it's just sets and like places or landscapes, it's when it starts to become emotional suggestion. So you start to suggest things that people are going through instead of just places or feelings or moods. In Extra Yarn, I'm not sure Extra Yarn has a point. I'm not sure the book has a direct point, but I think as close as I got to finding out what the point was there's an isolated 2 pages in the middle of the book. Annabelle's been knitting sweaters the whole time for this group of people in this town, and she gets to this guy named Mr. Crabtree, who's this homeless guy who apparently just lives outside and wears nothing but shorts and stands around in the snow. And he refuses a sweater. He doesn't get angry about it, but he very calmly just says, "I don't wear sweaters, it's not my thing." And so she knits him a hat, and that's the second page. It's just Mr. Crabtree it's wearing this hat. And there's no talking about how he feels about this or how he felt about it before or why he refused a sweater or anything. But it's the only close-up we do in the whole book of anybody. And we don't see him again. We don't see him before that. He's just these 2 pages. But I was so nervous drawing his face on it because I knew just how loaded it was. And there's no real, I can't explain it past that. But usually when you're really, really, really nervous, it means you're doing something good. It means you're into it. And so past that, me and Mac talked about it for a long time, and we were sort of debating about the close-up and everything, and it was just, for some reason, it just felt right. And that's about as close as you're going to get, I think, to finding a point in Extra Yarn. But there was so much suggested. There was so much suggested emotion into what she was doing for this particular person and the rest of the town. I think picture books are best at this, or at least they're really, really good at this, because by nature they're suggestive. The author isn't telling the whole story, and the illustrator isn't telling the whole story. The negative space in between those 2 things is the story. And the people reading it are filling that up with whatever they're bringing to it and just whatever they're thinking is going on. This might seem like kind of a lonely idea because whatever you're bringing to it is probably unique, and your experience is unique, and your associations are very unique. The less explicit a story is, the more it counts on us to bring these things. But picture books at their best are very suggestive. And it seems sort of lonely. It seems like you'd be on your own and that no one would really be reading the same story because we're all bringing our separate things to it. But the more I get into experiences like that with that bar, the more I feel like people really actually meet there. They don't end up being lonely in these stories, and there's not these separated experiences. The bar we saw in the movie, it's actually the same bar, and the way we think Mr. Crabtree felt is actually very much the same for each of us. When I finished the roughs for Extra Yarn, I sent them my parents in an email just to show them how things were going. And my mom wrote back and said she loved it, and then it brought back memories of this book she'd read us when we were little. A couple of them. She also told me that I was a very good boy, and also how was the cat. But she told me that these books, and I caught on to that. And ordinarily from your mom, her saying, "This reminds me of books when we were kids," would be a pretty standard comment. But for some reason, I latched onto it, and I called her like right away and said, "What books are you talking about?" Because when I got this text from Mac, it reminded me of this collection of like 4 or 5 books. It wasn't a set or anything. It was just 4 disparate books, but we'd had them and read them as sort of a pack every night for like a year, and they'd sort of formed this ball of memories in my mind that just was unique to that set of books, and it was just random, but I'd had this kind of feeling about it, and it reminded me of it. The text, like they say, it sort of feels old, and it feels like it's been worn in already, and it really matched this sort of just this general mood I remember from these 4 books. And so I asked her, like, "What books did you mean?" And she says, "Oh, I can't really remember the names of them, but there was a castle and a king, and there were some riddles, and there was some children," and that's like the 4 books combined. That's not a book. But she got it. She got the thing, and I had been thinking of this the whole time, and even just in the roughs, I sent it off, and that she'd remembered this thing, and that her memory of these collective books was the same as mine had been, to the point where she could find it even in the roughs, and just the tone of the story. I felt like I'd had a dream, and then she told me about the same dream that I'd had, and she'd met me there. I think that what's amazing about this is it's not so much that we get the same things out of books as what you'd think. And not only that we're going to be alone in these experiences when we read them, we are bringing our own things to it, but the more general these books are, And the more latitude they give us to wander around and sort of fill it up with our own experiences and really get personal with them, the more we can't help meeting each other in them, the more we can't help but make it a collective thing and sort of join up inside this weird extra spot that the book didn't even mean to make. Getting a chance to make these books and to make places like that, or even having a small part in making them, is a huge, huge privilege, and to be recognized that by people who value that is a huge honor. So thank you very, very, very much.
Hi, my name is Mac, and I'm really glad to be here tonight in your company, and I'm glad that our book is in the company of this year's honorees and the winners of the Boston Globe Horn Book Award, Picture Books past. It's a thrill. I want to thank my agent, Steve Malk, who's a trusty advisor, and Balzer and Bray for publishing our book. And I want to thank Jon Klassen. At a time when it's standard practice, I think, to keep authors and illustrators separate, and a lot of collaborators don't get to talk or meet, it means that much more to be up here tonight accepting an award with one of my dearest friends. So, his face, he made a really nice face when I said that too. I wish you guys could see it. I feel like, now we know each other pretty well at this point, all of us, and you and I, and you and me, and so I want to tell you about this date that I went on. It was a first date, and we were at my house. The conversation was kind of lagging, so I said, I got my laptop and said, you should see my friend John's website, as you do. I think now you can see what picture book authors are reduced to, is come back to my place and I'll show you Jon Klassen's etchings. Anyway, as I was clicking through the images, I saw a piece that I had never seen before. And it was a girl and her dog walking through the snow, and they were wearing matching sweaters. And I was struck by this piece. I loved it. And right there, I started telling my date the first bits of the story that would become Extra Yarn. And I started talking about a small town and a girl finding a box full of colorful yarn, and she takes it home and knits herself a sweater and has some extra yarn left, so makes a sweater for her dog, and still has some extra yarn, so she makes sweaters for her family and other people and animals and mailboxes and houses. And at that point, my date interrupted to finish the story, and she was like, and she just covers the whole earth with yarn, and everybody is wearing the same sweater, and there's peace. So that was our last date, too. But, I've read books like that before. And I hate books like that. The storyline wasn't just uninteresting to me. I thought it was fundamentally dishonest. There was no surprise or mystery or failure or darkness or strangeness or any of the complexity that makes life and stories rich. Her story was all loveliness, but it wasn't even convincingly lovely. And I think that too often we tell kids pleasant stories devoid of truth, and stories without truth are not good stories. And our audience deserves more from us. I started telling stories to kids when I was in college. I worked at a summer camp for 4 to 6-year-olds. It was a sports summer camp, and I was in charge of the 4-year-olds. And 4-year-olds can't really play sports, which is good because neither can I. We were about the same level. I would actually learn things at this camp. Like, I would come home and be like, did you know that when you sprint, you're supposed to run on the balls of your feet? And my best friend would be like, yeah, everybody knows that, Mac, and that's why you run funny. And it was a very painful experience, that part of it. But the good part was, the 4-year-olds would they'd get a soccer ball and dribble around some cones and then get tired and sit in the shade where I already was. And I would tell them stories. And I started telling them serial stories that I would start off on Monday and take it through Friday. And I'd say, Last weekend, I got home from work. I was very tired, looking forward to relaxing. And as soon as I got home, the phone rang, and it was the Queen of England. And she asked me for a favor. I had to go on this mission for her. And then the whole week, I would take them through these experiences. And the kids, they thought it was real, and I would have kids even who were not in my group of kids would come up to me and be like, "Hey, you're Mac. You're the guy who spies for the Queen of England," which is something that I had been waiting my whole life for somebody to tell me. In my dreams, it was a svelte Russian woman, but still, it was close. I had to take what I was gonna get, and it was amazing. So I started really having fun with these stories, and also the way that stories were real for these kids. There was a girl, Riley. I'll never forget her. She used to get cantaloupe in her lunch every day, and she hated melon, and so she would just throw it in the ivy. And I was like, Riley, you can't, she'd just then eat her fruit snacks and all the other terrible things, and I felt it was my responsibility to intervene here. So I said, Riley, you can't just throw your melon in the ivy. If you do that, the whole place is going to be overrun with melons soon. We'll have a real melon problem. So eat it. It's not a very good nutrition intervention at all. But that's what I told her. And so on the last day of camp, I went before camp very early and got a cantaloupe from the grocery store, and I put it in the ivy, and then at lunchtime I said, "Well, Riley, why don't you see what happened? Because you didn't listen to me." And she kind of went trudging into the ivy and came out with this giant cantaloupe. It's bigger than her head. I was like, "Wow, this is!" I think now she's gonna throw away melons forever. She thought it was really great. But she couldn't believe that she had grown this melon, and all the other kids ran over to see the melon that Riley grew, and one kid was like, "Why is there a sticker on it?" And I was like, "That's why I tell you to throw your stickers in the trash, too, guys. When you throw them in the ivy, it ruins nature." And all day, Riley, she's tiny little girl, carrying around this huge melon with her from sport to sport activity. And, it was amazing because I think about Riley all the time, because that image of this girl hauling around this giant melon, to me, is actually an image of the ideal reader. I think children can exist comfortably in that overlap between fantasy and reality. Riley knew that she didn't grow a melon, but she also knew that she really did grow a melon. And kids can make believe. They can actually truly make themselves believe and kind of suss out the rules that govern a fantasy world and fully experience it emotionally and intellectually. And really, this is what all fiction asks readers to do, to become invested in made-up worlds. And I think the fact is that kids are just better at this than adults. They're great fiction readers. And so we who write for them, we're obligated to write great fictions. And I think the picture book is uniquely positioned as a storytelling medium. The great divide in fiction is between the commercial and the literary. And commercial fiction has to entertain first, and literature should provide some sort of insight in what it means to live. I think that distinction is usually rigorously policed by writers and critics and readers and marketing departments. But in picture books, that border is more porous. It's a popular art. And picture book must be entertaining, but it's also expected to convey some truth. Books that try too hard to please can end up pandering, and books that strain for meaning can end up moralizing. But the best picture books meet this dual obligation. And we get to write literary fiction that people actually buy. What a world. Some of the most challenging, most exciting, and most interesting picture books that have ever been written are also the most widely read. Sendak, Silverstein, Brown, and Hurd, some of our boldest pioneers are still our bestsellers. The tradition of the picture book is a tradition of experimentation. There used to be a strong conviction that one good way to make people want to write a picture book was to make it unlike anything else. And today, it often feels that the prevailing wisdom is that the best way to make people want to read a picture book is to make it a whole lot like another book that's sold well. This isn't unique to our art form. The same plots get trotted out, and great ideas are given buzz cuts and lined up on the bookshelf. And I'm not a deluded nostalgist. I know that there have always been bland picture books. There have always been bland people. There have always been bland children. I know a couple. I'm not going to name them. But it's the bold books, the experiments, that drive our form. And when too many books on the shelf start to look like each other, it creates the illusion that the picture book has nothing to say, that our art is hidebound, vapid, foundering. It is not. I'm bullish about the future of the picture book. I love good picture books with strange stories, shaggy stories, books full of mysteries and surprises. And these books are still being written. But they need to be read and loved and faced out on a bookshelf so that you can see their beautiful covers. And so I'm particularly honored that our book has received this award, which, as Roger Sutton says, often recognizes unusual books. Thank God for unusual books. There are no formulas. There are no dogmas. There are no rules except for this. Try to write books that are honest and good. I'm trying, and I'll keep trying. Thank you.